Well, I'd like to start with a word of prayer. Kind Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this venue that you have provided, and we ask that your Spirit would be here. Let the words that are spoken be yours and not mine, and let our hearts be prepared. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, as I said earlier, the American family is somewhat at risk. And I think we've all probably noticed that things seem to be moving in a direction that is not particularly good. And what's happened all of a sudden to the American dream, which was so important to the whole world? Have you ever noticed that America is the only country that has a dream? There's no French dream. There's no Canadian dream. The Canadians thought they had one until recently, but we're the only ones who have a dream. And people want to come here, even though there are a lot of people who try to denigrate our country and say that it's a terrible place and it's systemically racist and it's unfair to everybody. I mean, if it was that bad, why are all these people trying to get in here? And when they got here, wouldn't they call all their family and friends and say, "Don't come here, this is a horrible place"? That's not what's happening. And really the question is, how do we maintain that? And the fundamental building block of a great nation is the family. And what does the Bible say about the family and how important it is? Think about in Genesis 2, where the Lord says, "It is not good that man should be alone, and I will make for him a helpmeet." And he took a bone from Adam's ribs and fashioned Eve. Now you notice he didn't take part of the skull so that she would be the head leading him around, and he didn't take part of the foot so that he'd be walking all over her. He took a rib, signifying somebody who would be by his side as a helpmeet. And that's what a helpmeet is, an equal who helps you to accomplish your goals. So God set the standard for the family. And it says in that chapter also, male and female, he created. Doesn't say anything about anything else. It says a male and a female. And there is actually a scientific reason for that, because the last I checked, those were the only combination capable of producing offspring. And, it's interesting that there's so much argumentation about that these days. What is a woman? We knew what a woman was for thousands of years. All of a sudden, we don't know what a woman is? How crazy is that? But at any rate, there does seem to be a war on the traditional family. And what is interesting is, let me see if I can find my telephone here. It's really neat these days because you can carry everything around with you in your phone. And if you go back to the congressional record from January the 10th, 1963, read into the congressional record were the goals for communists in the United States of America. And there were 45 of them. Now let me read a few of them. Like goal number 17, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks. 18, gain control of all student newspapers. 19, use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. 20, infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, policy-making positions. Number 21, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. And then down to number 24, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and television. 26, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. And then number 28, eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principles of separation of church and state. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations and on a worldwide basis. Discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. And then goes number 40 and 41. Discredit the family as an institution, encourage promiscuity and easy divorce, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. Isn't that interesting that so many of those are things that are going on in our society right now? I would have to say that those who are trying to fundamentally change us into something else have found the key by attacking our faith and our families, because they recognized that the country was much too strong to bring down militarily, but it could be brought down from inside by attacking the pillars of strength. And what you probably noticed is 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, when the family was portrayed on television, they were strong traditional nuclear families, a mother, father, children. You had strong fathers, like in Father Knows Best. And then it started to morph. And then you got the bumbling idiot dad, like Al Bundy, those kind of things. And it got to the point where the man was really kind of peripheral. You didn't really need him. And look what has begun to happen to family structures subsequently. I mean, in the 70s, still you have 40% nuclear families. Now it's 18% of all the families out there. And 40% of babies in this country are born out of wedlock. There have been lots of studies that have shown that children who are raised in single-parent families do not do anywhere near as well academically and in other ways. Now, there are exceptions. You're looking at one of them. But I will have to tell you that it wasn't fun growing up in a single-parent home, because you usually have a lot less in the way of resources. And you always feel, you're not quite as good as everybody else. You're always kind of looking through the window at everybody else and wishing you were inside. And you think about all the problems that you see in children today. They're multiplied significantly in those homes with single parents. But we're having a real problem with the men in our society today. Feelings of inadequacy, being attacked, saying that they're demonstrating toxic masculinity, whatever that is. But it's being defined as negative characteristics of men. But there's nothing wrong with masculinity. And I think we need to define it the right way. Masculine men are men who accept responsibility, who take care of their families, who love their wives, who are the appropriate models for their children. Has nothing to do with who you can beat up or, what ruckus you can cause in the bar. That's just stupidity. That has nothing to do with masculinity. And I think we have to start being more aggressive in opposing those things. But the Bible talks about the reasons for marriage, and it talks about the fact that in the Christian home, men should love their wives. Wives should submit to their husbands in the Lord. Now that's the key part there. If your husband's a smudge, but it also says that if you're still kind to your husband, even though he is a smudge, and you still help to smooth things over, you may win him over, and he may soon become a very responsible individual. So I think the wives can play a tremendous role that way. But I don't want to give short script to the single parents, because we have a lot of them now. We have more of them than the other way around. And in many cases, it's not necessarily even their fault. My mother got married when she was 13 years old, trying to escape dire poverty, and she didn't know that her husband was already married and had another family. I was telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah, and nobody thought it was that strange. But she thought that was very, very strange. And in fact, it was very strange. And she found herself trying to raise 2 young sons all by herself. But I'll tell you the interesting thing about my mother is she absolutely refused to be a victim. And she refused to let us be victims too. She never made excuses. And if we ever made an excuse, this was the poem that came out of her mouth. If things go bad for you and make you a bit ashamed, often you will find out you have yourself to blame. Swiftly we ran to mischief, and then the bad luck came. Why do we fault others? We have ourselves to blame. Whatever happens to us, here is what we say. Had it not been for so-and-so, things wouldn't have gone that way. And if you're short of friends, I'll tell you what to do. Make an examination. You'll find the faults in you. You are the captain of your ship, so agree with the same. If you travel downward, you have yourself to blame. And she knew that poem by heart, and we knew that if we made an excuse, that was coming out of her mouth. So guess what? We stopped making excuses. And isn't that what parents are supposed to do, provide the right kind of guidance, the right kind of example for their children. And that's why one of the goals of those who want to fundamentally change our nation is to minimize the influence of parents and allow others to tell the children who they are and what they're supposed to be doing. And that is a major, major problem. You know, in a lot of the school systems, you have teachers and counselors talking to the children about who they really are and saying, don't tell your parents. Don't get your parents involved. And your parents love you and they mean well, but they don't really know what they're doing. And we know what we're doing. And you think about how they are impacting some of the younger children in particular. You know, if children are naturally very, very curious, we all know that. But children are also very suggestible. And it's very easy to go to a child and say, do you think you're really a girl? Or do you think maybe you're a boy? Say that to a boy. Don't you sometimes feel this way? And did you ever try putting your mother's high heels on? Well, most boys tried that because they're curious. They're boys. They want to know what it feels like. It's not because they want to be a woman. Most little girls, you know, they put their dad's tube belt on. It doesn't mean they want to be a boy. It means they are curious and they want to know what it's like. But if then you have someone come along behind them and say, you see, I told you you were really a boy. And there are some things we can do, and we can give you some hormones, and we can change you so that you can be fulfilled. Now, the reason you know that that's not legitimate, all you have to do is look at the rates of mental illness and the suicides and attempted suicides and people who go down that route. And that will tell you who really has the best interests of the child at heart, and that is the parent. And that's the reason that there's been an explosion since 2020 of homeschools. They have doubled in that time. Long, long lines of kids for parochial faith-based schools. And it doesn't mean that people shouldn't get involved in helping to change the public school system. We all have a stake in it, and we can't just sort of turn our backs on the children in our society because they are predators who want our children. Now, what does the Bible say? In Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That is such a vital function. The most important thing that you can do is train your children the right way. Now, those who want to fundamentally change us know that too. It was Vladimir Lenin, one of the fathers of Marxism, who said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. And that's why they're so anxious to get in and get the children at a very young age. I've seen some of the books that the children read. Some of the pre-K schools, they have a book about worms and how these worms, as they grow up, can become either male or female. Now, why would you be teaching that to a preschooler? What are you trying to prepare them for? And then some of the books in the elementary schools that I've seen, it's actually very hard to look at them. I mean, there's frank pornography in these books. showing children sexual positioning and things of this nature. You saw one of those goals was to sexualize the children, promiscuity, all kinds of degenerate things in front of our children. Why would anybody be trying to do that unless they are trying to fertilize the ground for something else? And as you can see, it's succeeding. It's working very rapidly as we go downhill. The question is it possible to stop it? You know, I had a terrible temper as a child, and when I was 14, I almost stabbed someone. And my mother, who is the wisest person that I've ever known, even though she only had less than a third grade education, she knew some people who lived on a farm. So that summer, she sent my brother and me to live on the farm with them. And I gotta tell you, that was a real eye-opening experience. Getting up at 5 in the morning, milking cows, picking corn and beans, chopping wood, going to the sawmill, learning how to drive a tractor, cutting the lawns, baling the hay. And boy, did you work up an appetite. And that food was so good, that fresh food out of the ground, that was good stuff. And you didn't want to watch TV, you were just so tired, you wanted to go to bed and go to sleep. So that you could get up the next morning. But it was sort of a wake-up call. I know the reason that she did it in retrospect was because she wanted us to see what hard work was all about. And that maybe then we would study harder in school so that we didn't have to work that hard. But I actually grew to really love farming after that and loving the country and the peace and the solitude. And, you know, we have a farm. We don't spend much time there, but sometimes we love to go there and just watch the beautiful amber waves of grain as the wind is blowing through. And my mother used to plant some of the most incredible food on that farm, and what a difference it made. Well, one of the other things that is having an impact on family formation is women's empowerment. And the women's movement. Now, don't all the women start throwing tomatoes at me. But in 1963, it was Betty Friedan who wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique, which created a lot of discontent among women who previously were pretty happy with the things they were doing. It was okay, you know, taking care of the family and being the primary one who raised the kids, but all of a sudden, that was menial work, and those were second-class citizens, and they weren't nearly as important as the women who were out in the workforce and doing things. Well, of course, if you have both male and female parent out in the workforce, who's taking care of the kids? The most important thing that we have to do. So that began to be a problem. It's not as much of a problem if both parents recognize how important taking care of the kids are, and actually sit down and plan how it's going to be done. One of the things that's going on now is remote work. And a lot of people can do just as much at home with their computer as they could do in an office. But being able to work things out together and with employers is something that's very important. We're never going to go back, I don't think, to just one parent working and the other one staying home and taking care of the kids. Some people will do that, but most are not going to do it because we've gotten so used to having the extra car and the bigger house and these things. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, it's a sacrifice to take care of the kids. But do keep in mind, the kids are only there for part of your life. They come and they go pretty quickly, quite frankly. And so it's not something you have to commit to for the whole time. And how worthwhile is it? You know, I have to give my wife a lot of credit because, you know, she had a bachelor's degree from Yale and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. Is a very accomplished person, and said, the most important thing is for me to stay home and take care of the kids. And, you know, all three sons turned out to be terrifically successful, and I think a lot of that had to do with her. But also, as a dad, I knew how important it was to be there for the kids, because if you look at people who are incarcerated in the penal system, 80% of them come from fatherless homes. That father's influence is so vitally important. And so many kids grow up without a father, without a real authority figure in their life. And the first person they run into with great authority is police, or someone in their neighborhood who's badder than they are. In either case, it frequently doesn't work out well, and they may end up in the penal system or dead. It's a real problem, and a lot of it can be solved by having the father to be there. But it's not happening to a large degree because we have kept minimizing the role of fathers. You may have been to a college graduation recently. If you have, you've probably noticed that the vast majority of graduates are women. 60% of college graduates now are female. And what's happening to the guys? Where are they going? What are they doing? It's problematic. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of these young professional women, instead of looking for a husband, are just looking for a sperm donor so that they can have children, because then they know they have somebody who will love them, somebody who will cherish them, and that's what they want. But that's not taking into account the needs of the child. It's actually being somewhat selfish. And we need to really begin to emphasize what the Lord really wanted. It's much easier for women to work outside the home now because, 50, 60 years ago, a lot of the higher paying jobs naturally went to men because they required a lot of physical strength. That's not the case anymore. The majority of jobs now do not require a lot of physical strength. Now, interestingly enough, over the last 30 years, a study that was reported in the Washington Post a couple of years ago, looking at grip strength of men, has gone from 117 pounds to 98 pounds. For women, it has stayed 98 pounds over that whole time. So young women and young men have about the same grip strength now. But you don't need a lot of grip strength to hold an ink pen or to push keys on a keypad. And what has happened is men, because they're not involved in a lot of these strenuous activities, they don't develop the same kind of strength. But you don't really need the same kind of strength. It's a different world that we live in now. So it still is important to remember how those changes are affecting people. And then the whole concept of no-fault divorce. You notice that was one of the communist goals that I read, making divorce quick and easy, no fault, has had a tremendously devastating effect on our society and on our people. And you're not supposed to talk about that because it's not politically correct. Everybody is into what's good for me, what feels right for me. Well, that's not an attitude that is conducive to a strong nuclear family. It should be what's in it for us. How does it strengthen us as a unit, as a family? How does it make it better for us to be able to pass on our values to our children? So anytime that we become selfish, we contribute to the breakdown of what's happening with our families. And it's so important to recognize when you get divorced, it's devastating for the kids. I'm sure some of you have been through it. I certainly went through it. I can't tell you how devastating that was. And as a little 8-year-old, I had learned how to pray. And I prayed every single night, Lord, please help them to get back together. And I believed the harder I prayed that somehow it would happen. But it never did. But of course, as a youngster, I didn't know the reasons that my parents had gotten divorced. I didn't know about the bigotry, the bigamy that my father was involved in. But sometimes the Lord doesn't answer the prayer that we ask Him for. Because obviously He knows the end from the beginning. He knows what's better for us. And my father was involved in gambling and drugs and women. Women are okay, but you only need one. And he was involved in things that would not have been conducive to me becoming a successful adult. So, in retrospect, I was very glad that God didn't answer that prayer. But in the average case, that child loves both of their parents. And the worst thing you can do is to tear apart that family. And it's really worthwhile thinking about how do you mend the fences? How do you keep things running smoothly? You have to recognize when two people get married, they come from different environments. They come from different settings. So there's going to be friction. It's like rubbing two pieces of sandpaper together. But if you keep rubbing them, they get smooth. You just have to stay in there long enough for them to get smooth. And, our society today doesn't emphasize that. They say, if things aren't working out the way that you thought they would, throw them out and get someone else. And that's problematic. The statistics show us that by the age of 16, most young people in this country will have lived in either a single-parent home or a home with their parent and a cohabiter who is not married to their parent. That's the message that is being sent to our children about what family life is supposed to be. And that's why we're seeing it deteriorating so quickly in our society today. And we can accept it, or we can begin to fight it. We can begin to recognize that there are those who are trying to destroy America as we know it, and these are the methods that they are using. And I think if you know your enemy and you know what you're doing, you at least have a chance to see what's going on. You at least have a chance to begin to try to fix what's happening. You know, when it comes to the issue of gays, what does the Bible say about that? Well, it's actually the Bible's pretty straightforward. It says it's an abomination. The Lord does not like it. But it doesn't say that the Lord doesn't love them. I mean, the Lord loves everybody. And he died for everybody, including, you know, everybody in the LGBTQ, whatever letter you want to ascribe to it. He loves them, and he paid the ultimate price for them. And that means that we should love them too. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we have to promote what they do. And that's a very big difference. Jesus loved the sinners, and he was criticized for associating with various sinners. But he came to rescue the sinners. The church is a hospital for sinners. And we should always keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that we have to alter who we are. It doesn't mean that we have to redefine who we are. You know, when it comes to transsexuals, you know, I had a lot of very contentious sessions with Congress when I was the Secretary of HUD, because the transgender women wanted to be in the women's shelters. And the women didn't want them in the women's shelters, because a lot of the women were in women's shelters because they were having trouble with abusive men. So they were not that happy when somebody showed up who was obviously a man and wanted to be with them. And, you know, I suggested maybe we should have shelters for transgenders. They didn't want that. They want to be with the women. Very strange, isn't it? I was reading an article 2 weeks ago about some cyclists, women cyclists, and a transgender woman won first place. The second and third place finishers, who were real women, didn't want to be on the trophy stage with that person because they felt that it was unfair. And it was unfair, because men and women are different. And, you know, it's funny because some of the transgender community gets upset with you if you say that a man can't have a baby. Well, you know, you're being transphobic. The last I checked, men did not have ovaries and uteruses, or 2 X chromosomes. And of course they can't have babies. It's almost like we've lost our minds. You know, I talk to a lot of people from other countries, and that's the most common question I get asked. What happened to you guys? They think we've gone off the deep end. I think we have, to a large extent. But what does it require not to fall into those traps? The easy thing to do is just to go along with what everybody else is doing and saying, the Bible says we're supposed to be a peculiar people in 1 Peter 2:9. But that means you don't go along with what everybody else is doing just in order to get along with them. Jesus said, if you follow me, you're going to be persecuted. And you are. You're not going to be of the world. And they don't like people who are not of the world. But here's the way I kind of look at it. No matter what they do, no matter what they call you, no matter what they try to do to you, what is that against the backdrop of eternity? And it's like a flash in the pan. And we don't have to really concern ourselves about that. We have to concern ourselves with being a part of the family of God. And where do we get the courage? From Him. He is the source of courage. You know, I remember as a resident, I was on call one evening, and it was a time of a neurosurgical national meeting, so all the attendings were out of town at the meeting except for the one that had been left behind to take care of emergencies. And a young man was brought in to the emergency room who'd been severely beaten with a baseball bat. He was unconscious, his brain was swelling, the CAT scan demonstrated hemorrhages. He was going to die unless a dramatic operation was done in which you took out part of the frontal lobe and part of the temporal lobe to make space inside the skull. So I called for the attending because as a resident I couldn't do that operation anyway. I have to have an attending. Couldn't reach the attending. The nurses called for the attending, couldn't reach him. The paging operator called for the attending, couldn't reach him. I was left with a horrendous decision. It was illegal for a resident to take a person to the operating room to do an operation that I'd never done before. I'd seen it, but never done one before. Or just do the safe thing, put them in the intensive care unit, intubate them, give them steroids, and let nature take its course. Why should I risk my career and do something that you're not supposed to do? So I prayed. I said, Lord, please give me the wisdom to know what to do in this case. And as soon as that prayer was over, I instantly knew what to do. I had to take him to the operating room. It wasn't about my career, it was about his life. And everything came back to me. I remembered everything. It worked out extremely well. And today that young man is a child psychologist, doing very well, you know. But I never got into any trouble. In fact, I was praised for doing the right thing by the attendings when they got back. But that is really the key to creating strength not only in our church, but in our communities and in our nation. Being courageous, being willing to step out and do the things that other people won't do because they're afraid that they're going to be called a nasty name or that they're going to be canceled. Guess what? No one can cancel you if God doesn't want you canceled. And we have to remember who's really in charge. It makes all the difference. And that gave me a lot of courage throughout my whole career to sometimes do things that other people wouldn't do. Just asking God for guidance. I remember there was a young man, he had a disease called Van Hippel-Lindau, in which you develop these very vascular tumors in the brain. And he developed one right in the middle of his brain stem. And the brain stem is an area you can't really operate on. It's like a coaxial cable. So none of the adult neurosurgeons would do anything. Well, unfortunately for me, it turns out that his wife was a nurse on the pediatric neurosurgery service. So she had access to me. And she says, "You got to operate on my husband." I said, "But I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. He's an adult." And she said, "Well, he acts like a child." So, she just kept after me, and finally I said, "Okay, I'll go and talk to him." And I went and I spoke to him. I said, "Craig, if I take you to the operating room and I operate on this tumor, there's at least a 50-50 chance that you will die on the table." And he said, "Doc, if you don't operate on me, there's a 100% chance that I'm going to die. So I'll take the 50-50 odds any day." And I took him to the operating room. It was very complex. He'd grown a lot of new blood vessels down around the brainstem. But I found a way through them under the microscope, made a very tiny incision in the brainstem, and put a little micro probe into the brainstem, feeling toward the area where I felt the tumor should be, and then I could feel a little sponge-like give. I figured that was the capsule of the tumor, put in a little micro forceps and grabbed the capsule and started pulling it out and freeing it up with another small micro instrument. And then the evoked potentials went flat, the electrical signals, and the anesthesiologist said, "I told you you were going to kill him. You shouldn't have done that." And but I just continued to take the tumor out. Finally got it all out, closed him up. He was on maximum life support. Went back to the intensive care unit. He was a very, very religious individual, as was his wife. And we had spent a lot of time talking and praying. The next morning when I came in, he had been extubated and he was sitting up in the bed telling jokes. But what that case helped me to realize is that sometimes you do things and maybe the odds aren't good, but you recognize that there's someone else in charge that's greater than you are. That's really the key. And when we look at all the things that are going on right now in our society, and sometimes we have a tendency to maybe get a little discouraged and maybe think, what's the use of fighting? What's the use of resisting? Here's what we need to recognize. We serve an awesome God, all-powerful and a loving God. He loves everybody. It doesn't matter what you've done or where you came from. He loves you. And I'll tell you how much God loves you. If you would be happy living with him forever in heaven, he will find a way to save you. If you would not be happy, if you don't like his rules, he's not going to take you there because he loves you too much to torture you forever by having you in a place where you wouldn't be happy. So you don't really have to spend a whole lot of time fretting. And, I used to do that when I was a kid. I used to think, anything you do, the Lord's going to write that down so you can be punished for, where do you hear stuff like that? That's not who God is. He is a wonderful God. And when it comes to families, the best thing we can ever do is be part of the family of God.